dear listeners, and welcome back to yet another episode of Open Book, Open Mind. I am, as always, your trustworthy host, Edgar Chaput. Open Book, Open Mind is the podcast where we discuss books, predominantly novels, but there might be a little change of pace soon. There might be. No promises. And we don't necessarily have to like the book. We just have to open it, read it, and keep an open mind. On this week's episode, I want to discuss something that wasn't even on my radar because I didn't know the author existed up until, a few weeks ago. No, that's not true. Maybe a month or so ago at the time of this recording, which is, I don't want to date these recordings too much. It's not as though my podcast is time sensitive, but early summer 2025, let's say. And the author is Marguerite Duras, or Marguerite Duras, D-U-R-A-S. I guess if you have no idea how to say a French name, her name would be Marguerite Duras. But officially speaking, the S is silent in the French language, so I guess it would be Duras. And her book, L'amant, which translates to English as The Lover. As always, we'll do a little background check. Why is this book in my hand? Why did I read it? And for the listeners out there who are paying close attention to these episodes, in a recent recording, I believe for a split second, I referenced a book that was challenging me a little bit. I was referring to this one. I was referring to The Lover by Marguerite Duras. So we'll get into it. Well, why this book? As I said earlier, didn't even know this author existed up until maybe a month or two ago. And it was a good friend of mine. We often discuss literature and what we're reading. Maybe once or twice per year we'll do a collective reading in the sense that we will both read the same book at more or less the same time, and we'll kind of debrief ourselves, our thoughts. He's much more literate than myself. Although I do read a number of books per year, this guy is sort of on another level. He's the person who reads like 3 books at the same time. I've tried, can't do it. Anyways, and his library is quite extensive. And what do you do when you're done with a book that you may or may not have liked, but perhaps you don't anticipate reading it again, or perhaps you don't feel a deep-seated need to keep it in your library? Well, share the love. So he gave me a little stack of books a couple months ago, and I don't know, maybe a handful of books, and this was one of them. Marguerite Duras' The Lover. And I read a few things. What did I record recently? I think I recorded Sally Rooney's Normal People. That was a recent episode. And I went from that immediately into this. I figured, how about I read something that my friend gave me? And I did start it. I got about 20 to 30 pages in, and that's when I realized, okay, this is different. I'm going to have to turn a particular switch on in my mind, but I'm not ready. So I took a break. I didn't read anything for a week, which is why last week's episode was about booknetcanada.ca's statistics about reading habits in Canada. It's because I wasn't reading. I was reading that study, but I wasn't reading a book. That was the week I took a break from reading a novel because I got a little bit, not worried about The Lover, but it is different. So who is Marguerite Duras? What is The Lover? Marguerite Duras is a French novelist, long deceased at this point. She's a 20th century author, born in and at least partially raised in what at the time was known as Indochina, which was the French Asian colonies in southern Asia, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, predominantly Vietnam. People tend to mostly associate Asian French colonies with Vietnam. It's why a lot of Vietnamese people speak French. There's the famous scene, depending on what version of Apocalypse Now you watch, there's that sequence that takes place in the middle of a jungle at the home of a French family. They're there because Vietnam was a French colony. So she's born and at least partially raised in that context, very early 20th century. And she sort of goes back and forth between France and Indochina, studied math. I believe she studied a bit of law as well. But her heart strings and her soul told her that she needed to write. And she wrote a plethora of books. When you open the edition, Les Éditions de Minuit, which, I mean, it's a French publication house. I don't think it has an English name, but I guess that would mean Midnight Publishers. It sounds kind of sexy, actually, which is ironic, given what happens in this book. But I'm opening it right now. Forgive this noise. This is the book being opened, and I mean, there are 3 pages of her not bibliography, but yes, her oeuvre, and it just goes on and on and on. I mean, the very first thing she wrote was in 1943, and the very last thing she wrote was in, good Lord, in 1995. That's incredible. And so this is one of her latter books, 1984, and it won a literary prize in France, something called Le Prix Goncourt, the Goncourt Prize, which has been going on for quite some time. It was established, or the idea of a Goncourt Prize was established by someone of the name of Edmond de Goncourt in 1892. This gentleman, who was obviously a haughty-taughty, very literary-minded gentleman, a French gentleman, and he passed away, and his testament implored that French literary academia would install this a prize of some sort to celebrate and promote good French prose, good French writing. And that started officially in 1903. So this Prix Goncourt has been going on for over 120 years, which is really quite impressive. And in 1984, Marguerite Duras, The Lover, won that prize. Generally speaking, the plot as it is of The Lover, it is semi-autobiographical. It's like a fictional biography. It's not. It isn't a biography. I mean, it is written as a novel, but it is heavily inspired by many things that happened in Marguerite Duras' not lifetime, but in her teenage / early, very, very early adulthood, whilst in Indochina. And so I almost said Marguerite Duras plays a character. That's spoilers. I'm a big movie fan. So the protagonist, who is also the narrator, usually in the first person, although sometimes in the third person, is this sort of late teenager. That doesn't even make any sense. Like an old teenager. She's not like 13 or something. I think she's supposed to be like 17 or thereabouts, 18 maybe. And she's in Indochina, and she's going to school. Her mother is also a former teacher. A little bit of familial strife. Her mother's monoparentale. She's a single mom. The father passed away. The father's sort of not in the picture in the book. Briefly mentioned, but he's not in the picture. He's already deceased. And the mother's had a bit of a rough go. She's tried investing in real estate. It hasn't really worked out. She tries investing in chicks, and that doesn't work out. A little bit weird. And basically the plot as it is this protagonist who's not named, although again it's supposed to be semi-autobiographical. So this protagonist, this older teenager / very, very young adult, has a love affair with a Chinese gentleman who's as I recall, about 15 to 20 years older than her. And of course, they have to do this in secret in a particular room, sort of in the inner city. And he tends to pick her up. He drives her courteously from school to this room they have. And it's essentially, I mean, there is kind of a plot, but it does jump back and forth timeline-wise, and it's mostly written in the first person, and it is essentially, and this is the crux of why I kind of needed to take a week off from reading to mentally prep myself, is it's not written like a traditional novel. If you've written a novel, anything, it doesn't matter, an Ian Fleming Bond book, Nostromo, anything, a detective story, a romance novel, just a novel, you kind of have the gist of how they're written. This isn't that. This is essentially almost like a stream of consciousness of the author recollecting moments that are stitched together. It's not that they're not connected. Many of them are, in fact, connected. But she's remembering moments of that time in her life when she was doing things with this lover, and how maybe her family reacted to this lover, and how life was at school, and the clothing she would wear. She liked this men's hat. It was a hat that usually men would wear, but she wanted to wear that hat, and that was her style. Why would the book put so much emphasis on this hat and the fact that she liked dressing a little bit, to an extent, like a gentleman as opposed to like a lady? Well, that's just who she was, and that's what made her unique, I guess. That's what was part of her charm, I suppose. So it's if you're going to read Marguerite Duras' The Lover, get ready. It is a novel, but it's not written like a novel. If anything, I would say it is written, it would be as if I sat down to write a book which was semi-autobiographical, and it was about, I don't know, my first year in high school. But I didn't really plan it. It's going to sound terrible, but I'm not criticizing. I didn't really plan the book. I just sat down for a week and wrote my memories. Now, it would all take place during that first year in high school. There kind of would be a beginning and a middle and an end. It wouldn't be so scattershot that the reader would have no idea what's going on. It would be somewhat structured, but taken as is, it would read like I recollected those memories on the spot. I put pen to paper or fingertips to keyboard, and that was it. I published the book. I published the book as is. That's kind of what The Lover is, and that's what struck me in those first 20 to 30 pages, where I struggled to get into the flow. It was so different. It's certainly very immediate. The book itself is old, published in 1984. At the time of this recording, that was 31 years ago. And at the time of publication, the author / protagonist is recollecting stuff that happened about 40 years ago, but it does feel quite immediate. It's very personal. And this isn't a character, and here's where some of the context of this book is important. She's a Caucasian French teenager living in Indochina, having sexual relationships with a Chinese gentleman who is significantly older than her. There's call it how it is. There's a little bit of taboo in this story, and the characters themselves, certainly the Chinese gentleman and one of her older brothers, one of the protagonist's older brothers, they kind of recognize that there's an element of taboo going on in here, something not a whiff of the boudoir, but it's naughty. There's some naughty things going on. In fact, the Chinese gentleman, the first time he accosts her, she can tell, in her narration, she can tell that he's extremely nervous. He can't help himself. He finds her so charming and so attractive, but she can, sometimes you just get a vibe. Some people, man, woman, child, adult, doesn't really matter. Some people, you just get a sense that they're quite confident, they're quite comfortable in their own skin. And other people, there's just something a little bit, not off. Off is not the right word, but you can tell that they're not 100% comfortable. And that can depend on the context too. And this Chinese gentleman, who is fairly wealthy, runs a family business, and so on and so forth. He studied in France, so he's, I guess, sort of wooed and wowed by French culture and French women, which is maybe why he's attracted to this young French woman. And he's nervous around her. She's not so nervous around him, even though it's her first sexual experience. And the book isn't so explicit. It's not like an X-rated book or anything, but it would, if you were to put a movie rating on it, it's definitely rated R. I'll put it that way. It's not an X book, but it's definitely rated R. There was also the aspect of interracial relationships, which, back in I believe this takes place in the 40s, late 30s, early 40s. They were frowned upon, certainly not as accepted as they are today. Not in France, not in Canada. There are tons and tons of countries the world over where nobody really bats an eye about an interracial relationship. But, back in the 40s, a little bit awkward, plus, she is the descendant of a culture that was a colonizing country, and they're having this relationship in the country that has been colonized. It's all a little bit awkward, despite the fact that they can't really help themselves. There's also the fact that life with her own family is not very easy. The mother seems to go a little bit mad. After a while, she has trouble communicating with her 3 children. I say 3. You have the protagonist's younger brother, and the protagonist's older brother. And the older brother is really quite a bit of a malicious individual. He does some things and he says some things with clear ill intent. He's not a very altruistically minded individual. In fact, even after the mother passes away, it's strongly suggested that he somehow, some way, fluffs up the mother's will in his favor. It's not really explained how the character does that, but you get a sense that she's probably a little bit. The protagonist, is probably a little bit alienated from her own family, so she welcomes this lover of hers, hence the title of the book, even though she herself is never fully connected to this lover. I guess it's kind of her best option at the time, which makes for a very interesting context in a book like this, written as such, which is a collection of memories during a brief period of her life. Structurally, apart from that it's written from the first person predominantly, it's occasionally written from the third person. The first time it happened, I thought I understood why. It almost felt like the author got, I shouldn't say cold feet, because that would be a little bit mean-spirited. Although God knows, I have no idea what was going on in her mind when she wrote it, but cold feet in the sense that, this scene is it's maybe even a little bit more intimate than I'm willing to share with the reader, so this is going to be told from the third person. So I thought that's what that meant, but the third person narration does pop up a couple other times in moments that didn't strike me as R-rated as some other ones. So I wasn't quite certain, are the third person sections, which aren't very long, but are the third person sections moments that the author was ashamed of? Is it kind of a sense of, that idea, that expression of, is almost like an out-of-body experience? Like we could almost see ourselves doing the thing that we were doing at the time, in the moment of. Is that what's going on when it's sometimes a third-person narration? It's the moment was so incredible, I didn't recognize myself. I wasn't myself. Ergo, third-person narration. I'm not quite clear on why that happens sometimes. So that was a little bit of a curveball. speaking of the book structure, there are no chapter breaks and there's no dialogue, which is funny because the last book I reviewed, Sally Rooney's Normal People, there was dialogue, but it didn't have quotation marks. So I don't know what's going on with me reading books where the dialogue is written in a particular way, but it's not direct quotes. The quotes are in the prose, if you know what I mean. And there are no chapter breaks, which makes sense given that this is written and presented mostly as a stream of consciousness and a stream of memories. I guess it would make sense that there wouldn't be any chapter breaks. It's kind of like Marguerite Duras had a box or a suitcase full of emotions and ideas that she kind of felt like she needed to put on paper, and she did. And going back to my own example of, writing about my experiences during the first year of high school, but I just sort of regurgitated everything I could remember, or at least maybe not everything I could remember, but the highlights that I can remember. I'm not sure I would put chapter breaks if it was supposed to be presented like that. Interesting fun fact: there is in fact a film inspired by this book. It's directed by Jean-Jacques Hano. Came out in 1992, and I've seen a few pictures of it. I must confess, it looks very nice. Now, apparently, Marguerite Duras was nonplussed by the film's interpretation of her book, which, again, I haven't seen the movie, but having read the book, I struggle to fathom how you would film that. Given everything I just said and how I described its structure and its presentation style, what would the movie, like, other than a little bit of a risque drama with some sexual tension, some illicit sexual tension, like what kind of a movie are you making, really? But again, I haven't seen it. And so, interestingly enough, Marguerite Duras, seemingly in response to this film, she actually, in the early 1990s, she actually rewrote a version of The Lover. If you can believe it, L'amant de la Chine du Nord came out in 1991, so The Lover of Northern China, again, because The Lover is from China. So it's almost like she redid her own book because she was so dissatisfied with the film adaptation of her first book, not her first book, but her first crack at this story, which is a bit of a wild concept when you think of it. I kind of feel like going down that rabbit hole right now. Now that I've read The Lover, I feel like seeing the movie The Lover and then reading her own remake of the book. It's a bit of a wild concept. So there you have it. There are some of my own stream of conscious thoughts on Marguerite Duras' L'amant, or Marguerite Duras' The Lover, if you will. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Hey, it's a book that won a prize. I guess that counts for something. Did I like it? Did I didn't like it? This is the kind of book where I'm happy I read it for the experience. Was it some sort of reading material that's going to stay with me to the end of my days, and it's one of the best books I've ever read? No, not necessarily. Its style, its presentation style isn't quite up my alley, but hence the name of the show, Open Book, Open Mind. This is why I do this show. Well, it's one of the few reasons why I do this show. I'm not saying I want to only read books that are written like The Lover, but it's certainly one of the reasons why I wanted to do this show, Open Book, Open Mind. I don't know if I loved the book, but it certainly was an experience, and I'm happy that I lived through it, at least for a few days. It's not a very long book. It's not even 150 pages, so if you're in the proper mindset, you can read it in about 2 or 3 days. So that was it. That was another episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and we will catch you on the next one. Take care.